Although the franchise tended to have an Alien of the Week with the write of their episodes, there are some key factions that ran through the franchise and have become just as iconic to Star Trek as the Federation itself. This includes factions such as the Klingons, Vulcans, Romulans, and the Borg. Greetings and welcome back to Checkpoint Gaming Star Trek Ascendancy. For this episode, we will be going over the faction development and expansion. With starbases, they allow the player to build ship away from the home system. Commission a starbase, exhaust a command, and place a starbase token next to the system that the player controls that does not already contain a starbase. There is a no resource cost to commission a starbase, but a player can only place 3 of them over the course of the game. With the commissioning of a starbase, only one starbase may be developed for ascendancy level achieved by the player. With that said, it is possible to control more than this, but the player will have to take a starbase from a rival. So it is possible for a faction to control any number of starbases as long as they take them over. Once placed, the starbase cannot be moved, discarded, or destroyed. However, it is allowed to be freely swung around the system in order to make room for new space lanes. They can even be picked up and placed on the other side of the system in order to make space for a given space lane. For each starbase that a player controls, it will increase their number of commands by 1. With this additional command, it starts off exhausted, preventing it from being used this turn.
Due to the nature of the Andorians and their culture, commissioning a starbase requires the exhausting of 2 commands instead of 1. With the Vulcans, they cannot build starbases due to them having ambassadors. However, they can gain control of starbases through planetary invasion and cultural hegemony. Upon gaining control of a starbase, they gain the extra command and can build the ship and form fleets there as normal.
With the grouping of ships into fleets allows the player to move much more efficiently and may benefit from a fleet special rules. With the formation of a fleet, there are 2 ways to form them. They can be formed when building new ships and have them form into a fleet during the building process, or a player can use a command to group ships into a fleet in the command phase. In order to group ships into a fleet during the command phase, the ships must be in the player's home system at one of their starbases or in a system allowed by one of their advancements. With making a fleet during the command phase, the player will need to exhaust a command, take at least 3 ships off of the board, and then place them into one of the player's 3 fleet cards. From there, place the appropriate fleet marker onto the board in the same system. And it doesn't matter which fleet card the player chooses to use. As long as the player doesn't exceed the number of fleets they're allowed to build, they can choose any fleet card they wish. The numbers printed on the fleet card and fleet marker are just there to help differentiate which fleet is which, so the player can select a fleet in any order they wish.
When forming Andorian fleets, exhaust 2 commands instead of 1. Andorian ships may still be grouped into a fleet during the building phase without exhausting a command.
With each civilization, they have 3 different fleet cards, each one being double-sided. The different sides of the fleet cards have different special rules and allow for different numbers of ships. When a player commissions a fleet, they have to choose which side they will be using. And in order to use a different side of a fleet, the player will have to decommission the fleet and recommission it at their home system or starbase. The number of fleets that a player is allowed to form is based upon their given ascendancy level. So the higher the faction's ascendancy is, the more fleets they are allowed to construct, maximum number allowed being that of 3. But once a player has either reached or exceeded their fleet limit, they cannot commission any more fleets. If a player's fleet limit is decreased for any reason, the fleets that are already found in play will be unaffected. Players can also add or remove ships that are in the same sector to one of the player's fleets at any time during the turn, except when the fleet is using a movement command, either impulse or warp. Because of this, a fleet will be unable to add or remove ships while they are in mid-movement. And if a fleet is at warp, it must drop out of warp before the player can add or remove ships from them. The player does not have to be in their home system or at their starbase to add or remove ships from the fleet. When adding a ship, it can be done up to the fleet's maximum size. At any time on the player's turn, including the building phase, they can choose to disband the fleet that is not at warp by taking the ships off of the fleet card and putting them back onto the board in the same sector that the fleet occupied. And it does not take a command for a player to disband a fleet. But if a fleet ever contains fewer than 3 ships, it is immediately disbanded, even in the middle of a space battle or planetary invasion. When this occurs, any special rules connected with the fleet are immediately lost. With fleets that are in a space battle and have special rules that will affect their attack, roll the dice separately when rolling the hit with a fleet and individual ships. On the player's turn, they may exhaust a command to draw 2 cards from their advancement deck and add them to the project area. The number of research nodes the player currently controls will determine the number of active projects the player may have. And even if doing so would put the player over their maximum number of active projects, the player is allowed to launch new projects during the command phase. Anytime a player has more projects in the project area than they have research nodes under their control, they must discard a number of projects until they're back down to their maximum number of permitted projects. With the discarding of the project, the player is allowed to discard projects that are already found in the project area or from the projects that they drew. This also extends to Borg Tech projects. From there, place the discarded projects on the bottom of the player's advancement deck and return any research tokens on the discarded project to the supply. Also, don't shuffle their advancement deck. There are also situations where a player will take advancement from another player. If the player discards an advancement card that came from another player's advancement deck, then it will go back to the bottom of the other player's deck.
The rule of acquisition number 21, advancement, it allows the player to draw advancement cards from their rival's advancement deck. However, they are limited to one advancement card acquired in this manner at any given time.
And though players aren't allowed to directly give resources to each other, they are allowed to establish trade agreements. What this will do is allow for peaceful commerce to occur between otherwise hostile factions. At the start of the game, each player will possess 3 of their own trade agreements and will only produce resources when they are given to another player. In order to give or receive a trade agreement, players will have to have a first contact and have a ship ambassador or control node adjacent to one of the rival ship ambassadors or control nodes. When a ship or fleet finds itself suddenly located in a map sector due to an exploration card, they can establish a trade agreement with the rival faction found in the sector, but it doesn't count as first contact. As long as these conditions are met, players are allowed to do this at any time. Once a player has given a rival a trade agreement, they may exchange it for one of their other trade agreements that they still hold, regardless of where the ships are positioned. With trade agreements, players are only allowed to hold one from each rival at a time. Even if a trade agreement is exhausted, they are not allowed to hold a second trade agreement from that faction. If a player currently holds any trade agreement of a rival, then they are considered to be at peace unless the trade agreement is exhausted. When a trade agreement has become exhausted, the holder of said trade agreement cannot receive any resources from it during the recharge stage. They are also unable to be revoked or exchanged until they are refreshed during maintenance.
With the Romulan Suspicious Special Rule, it requires them to exhaust any trade agreements that they receive or have exchanged. Because of this, it forces the Romulan player to wait a turn in order for them to benefit from the trade agreement. Another exception to this has to do with the Breen, who are isolationists, making them largely uninterested in establishing relationships with other civilizations. Because of this, the Breen player cannot exchange trade agreements with another player unless the other player controls a system that is adjacent to Breen territory. In regards to Breen territory, it consists of all systems that are connected to the Breen home system, regardless if the Breen player controls their home system or not. So with the Breen territory, it consists of a chain of systems that the player controls. With an adjacent system to Breen territory, it consists of a system that is connected to Breen territory by a single space lane. And since players are unable to control a phenomenon, any system that is separated from the Breen by a phenomenon is not considered to be part of the Breen territory, even if it is controlled by the Breen.
With the establishing of a trade agreement, it allows respective players to act for permission, move through and into sectors that contain the other player's ships. With any rival whose trade agreement that the player does not hold, they are considered hostile. During the recharge stage, players will take the resource as pictured on the trade agreement that they received from the other players. After making a trade agreement, a player may revoke it at any time and for any reason. But in order to give back a rival's trade agreement, they will have to betray them. With betrayal, it occurs when a player attacks or attempts cultural hegemony against a player whose trade agreement they hold. Upon doing so, the trade agreement is given back to its respective owner. The exception to this is when the trade agreement is exhausted. This means that the player has broken the peace and will have to return the trade agreement. Once an attack or hegemony attempt has begun, the participants cannot exchange trade agreements until the conflict is over. With the base version of the game, it comes with 3 civilizations: the Federation, the Klingons, and the Romulans. It also includes all of the necessary components needed to play the game, such as system disks, space lanes, exploration cards, fleet markers, command consoles, home systems, faction-specific ship, faction-specific control nodes, and dice. Accompanying the base game are a number of expansions for those who are interested in them. Simple additions are seen with Escalation Pack, where additional ships and control nodes are given to each faction, faction-specific dice, and replacing Starbase tokens with actual models. But with the more complicated expansions, they include playable factions which consist of the Andorians, Breen, Cardassians, Dominion, Ferengi, and the Vulcans. Besides adding additional space lanes, resource nodes and tokens, system disks, and exploration cards to the larger game, they add their own faction-specific elements as well. This can be seen with their given homeworld system disk, dedicated ship with 3 fleet markers and cards, control nodes, advancement deck, trade agreements, turn summary card, and command console with accompanying sliders.
The only noticeable exception to this has to do with the Vulcans, who have 5 ambassador figures instead of bases and 10 agenda cards. With the Dominion, they will by default begin the game within the Gamma Quadrant. With that said, it is possible to ignore the Gamma Quadrant and have the Great Link be treated as a normal system within the Alpha Quadrant. If choosing to do this, do not implement the Gamma Quadrant rules. Ignore the Gamma Quadrant symbol found upon the Great Link and do not use either the Wormhole system piece or any of the Gamma Quadrant system disks.
To incorporate these expansions into the game, add the exploration cards from each expansion into the base exploration deck and the system disk into the core system deck. The only system discs not to be included into the system deck are Andor, Breen, Cardassia Prime, Ferenginar, the Great Link, and Vulcan, along with the Gamma Quadrant system discs. When adding these factions, they will increase the total number of possible players by 1. As of right of this series, the total number of players that can play the game is 9. When adding an additional player, increase the duration of the game, so playing with all 9 factions, expect a long-ass gaming session. And like the Federation, Klingons, and Romulans, the home systems of each of these factions, when played, will be fully developed and will have 3 systems assigned to it. The only variations that currently exist have to do with the Vulcans, who start the game with 3 Ascendancy, and the Dominion, who start the game with 5 Infiltrators down upon the Great Link. In addition to the 9 playable factions that have just been listed, there is 1 non-playable faction. At the right of the series, this consists of the Borg. Their expansion includes the Borg Command Console card, Cube card, 5 Borg Cubes, 5 Borg Spires, 15 Borg Assimilation Nodes, 6 Resource Nodes, 20 Borg-specific Exploration cards, 7 Borg-specific System Discs that includes the Transworld Pub, 20 Borg Tech cards, 30 Borg Command cards, and 9 Borg Dice. With the Borg Cube, it represents their starships within the game, with Borg Spires being placed in systems that the Borg control. These spires will also spawn new cubes as the game progresses. Representing the Borg Assimilation Nodes, they indicate how close their spire is to completing a new Borg Cube. These nodes are built around the base of the spire and also track the current shield modifier of a Borg-controlled system. Whenever a player defeats the Borg in combat, they will claim a Borg Tech card. The more Borg technology a player obtains, the better said player will be when facing against the Borg. With the Borg command cards, they direct the movement of the cube during the Borg's turn and will designate the type of system each cube will target. Even though they are not controlled by a player, they still pose a threat to all those found in the game. With these actions, they are controlled by the game until they assimilate a player. With the rules that govern the Borg, they are addressed in Episode 5. It's just worth noting that playing with the Borg allows games to consist of 1 or 2 players instead of the minimum 3 players in a standard game. So with that said, that is what you need to know about the faction development and expansions to Star Trek Ascendancy. With that taken care of, we can start talking about combat, invasion, and conquest. If you liked this episode, feel free to give it a like, and if you want to stay up to date on any future episodes we upload, go ahead and subscribe. You can also support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/checkpointgaming. See you in the next episode, and happy gaming.